The kids will be fine, Daniel said, checking his Rolex while tossing designer suits into a leather suitcase. Rebecca's wonderful with children. They'll love her beach house. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the man I'd been married to for 13 years pack up his life. His words made my heart sink, but I kept my face expressionless. My name is Sophia Reynolds. I'm 37 years old, and my husband was leaving me and our children for his 29-year-old executive assistant. But I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging him to stay. Instead, I was thinking about the surprising call I'd received yesterday from my grandmother's attorney. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the curtains of our Westlake home, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. Outside, the gardener was trimming the hedges Daniel had insisted on, just like the marble countertops and the imported Italian furniture. Everything in our life had Daniel's fingerprints on it. Everything except the children. They're only 7 and 9, Daniel, I said quietly, watching him meticulously fold his French-cuffed shirts. They barely know Rebecca. Ethan still asks for you to read his bedtime story every night, and Olivia just made you that Father's Day card that's sitting on your dresser. Daniel barely glanced at the handmade card covered in glitter and crayon drawings. He continued packing, as if I'd commented on the weather. Kids adapt, he said with a dismissive wave. Besides, they'll have to. We're closing on the beachfront property next week. Rebecca's already talking about enrolling them in that prestigious private school near the coast. Better education, better opportunities. I bit my tongue, thinking about how Olivia had just been selected for the gifted program at her current school, how Ethan had finally made friends with the shy boy next door. Daniel didn't know these things. He'd been too busy working late nights at the architectural firm, or so I'd thought. And when exactly were you planning to tell them? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Or were you hoping I'd handle that? Conversation 2. Daniel frowned, his perfectly groomed eyebrows knitting together. I thought we could tell them together. Tonight, maybe. Rebecca thinks it's important they understand this isn't about them. Of course, Rebecca had thoughts on how to parent our children. Rebecca, who had never raised a child in her life. Rebecca, who had been sending me cheerful emails about office birthday celebrations while sleeping with my husband. And the divorce? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. When are you filing? Daniel paused, carefully, placing his collection of designer watches into their velvet case. A smirk played at the corner of his mouth, the same smirk I'd once found charming, now revealing something darker. No need for all that messiness, Soph. Rebecca and I think we should keep things informal. No lawyers, no splitting assets. I'll support the kids, of course. Maybe we can just use a mediator and avoid the whole legal circus. I watched him move around our bedroom, selecting which parts of his life to take, which to leave behind. 13 years of marriage, reduced to a packing exercise. 2 children, relegated to weekend visits and holiday arrangements. Our family home, now just a stopping point on his journey to something, someone, new. Of course he wanted to keep things informal. Because he didn't know about my grandmother's trust fund. He had no idea that his carefully constructed plans were about to collapse like a house of cards. Whatever you think is best, I said, watching him zip up his bags. He paused at the doorway, eyeing me suspiciously. His hand rested on the antique door handle, the one I'd found at that little shop in Providence during our 10th anniversary trip. The trip where he'd spent most of the time on his phone, handling urgent client matters. You're taking this better than I expected, he said, studying my face. I smiled, thinking about the bank notification that would arrive tomorrow morning. I've learned to be adaptable. The confusion on his face was almost worth the pain of the moment. Almost. I'll have the movers come for the rest of my things next week, he said, hefting his suitcase. Rebecca thinks we should get settled before the housewarming party. Some of the partners and their wives will be there. I wondered if any of those wives knew, if they whispered behind my back at charity galas and school functions. Poor Sophia, so devoted to her children, she didn't see what was happening right under her nose. "Will you be bringing the children to the housewarming?" I asked, following him down the grand staircase he'd insisted on during our renovation 3 years ago. Daniel hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. "Probably not the first one. Rebecca thinks it might be overwhelming for them. Too many new faces." More likely, Rebecca didn't want the awkwardness of introducing her lover's children to her sophisticated friends. Children had a way of making things real, of turning affairs into messy family situations. "I'll be in touch about seeing them," Daniel said, opening the front door. "Once Rebecca and I get settled in, the realtor says the property has a perfect guest room for them, overlooking the ocean. As if an ocean view could make up for a father's absence. As if occasional weekends in a fancy beach house could replace daily goodnight kisses and breakfast. Conversations. Take care, Daniel," I said softly as he loaded his bags into the trunk of his sleek, black luxury car. The car he'd bought himself for his 40th birthday, telling me it was an investment in his professional image. He drove away without looking back, one hand raised in a casual wave. He thought he was heading toward a perfect new life with his younger woman and ocean views. He had no idea that by tomorrow morning, the money he'd been secretly funneling to pay for Rebecca's apartment would be gone. The down payment on their beachfront dream home would vanish. The carefully separated accounts where he'd been hiding his bonus money would be frozen. I closed the front door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of everything. The children would be home from school in 3 hours. I needed to be strong for them, to find the right words to explain why their father had chosen a new life that didn't include daily bedtime stories or Saturday morning pancakes. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, looking out at the backyard where Ethan and Olivia had spent countless hours playing. The swing set Daniel had promised to build but never got around to. The garden I'd planted with the children, teaching them about patience and growth. We would be okay. My grandmother had made sure of that. And Daniel was about to learn that some choices have consequences, consequences he never saw coming. Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 24 hours earlier, I had sat in the plush office of Mr. Harrison, my grandmother Eleanor's longtime attorney. The mahogany-paneled walls were lined with law books and framed credentials, creating an atmosphere of old-world authority. Through the tall windows, I could see the Boston skyline, so different from my grandmother's small New Hampshire hometown, where I'd spent childhood summers learning to bake pies and tend gardens. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mrs. Reynolds," Mr. Harrison said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. His silver hair and bow tie gave him the appearance of someone from another era, fitting, as he had been my grandmother's trusted advisor for over 40 years. "Your message sounded urgent," I replied, smoothing my skirt nervously. "Is there a problem with grandmother's estate?" "It's been 3 years since she passed," Mr. Harrison smiled kindly. "No problem at all. In fact, quite the opposite." He opened an embossed leather portfolio and removed several documents. "Your grandmother was an extraordinarily perceptive woman, Mrs. Reynolds, and exceedingly protective of her family." I smiled, thinking of Eleanor Reynolds, the woman who had taught me that true strength often looked like gentleness, who had built a small inheritance from her husband into a substantial fortune through careful investments and quiet determination. "As you know, your grandmother left specific instructions about her estate," Mr. Harrison continued. "What you don't know is that she created a special trust fund for you and your children with very particular conditions." He slid a document across the desk. The paper was thick, expensive, with my grandmother's elegant signature at the bottom. The Reynolds Family Protection Trust. I read aloud, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. Your grandmother established this trust before she passed away, but with explicit instructions that you were not to be informed of its existence unless certain conditions were met. I frowned, confused. What conditions? Mr. Harrison's expression became grave. The trust activates if your husband attempts to abandon his financial responsibilities to you and your children. It includes several triggering events: emptying, joint accounts, hiding assets, attempting to avoid equitable distribution in divorce. My heart began to pound. For months, I'd noticed strange financial movements, credit card statements arriving with sections highlighted as business expenses, weekend getaways I'd never heard about, investment accounts suddenly inaccessible online, property discussions that seemed to go nowhere. How would my grandmother have known? I whispered, more to myself than to Mr. Harrison. The attorney's eyes softened. She didn't know specifically, Mrs. Reynolds, but she had experienced something similar in her first marriage, long before she met your grandfather. She was determined that no descendant of hers would ever be financially vulnerable to a spouse's betrayal. I remembered my grandmother's occasional cryptic comments about her life before grandfather. How she would say, "Always have your own money. Sophia, always know where every penny lives." I had thought it was just Depression-era wisdom, not hard-earned life experience. Mr. Harrison, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking, if my husband were moving money to private accounts, if he were planning to leave, the trust's legal team has been monitoring your family's financial activities since your grandmother's passing, he interrupted gently. We have documented numerous concerning transactions over the past 8 months. He produced another folder, this one thicker, filled with bank statements, property records, and transaction histories. My stomach turned as I flipped through evidence of Daniel's betrayal, not just emotional, but financial. This account, I pointed to a statement from a bank I didn't recognize. I've never seen this before. Opened 6 months ago, Mr. Harrison confirmed. Initial deposit of $175,000, followed by monthly transfers averaging $15,000. The address on record is an apartment in the financial district, Rebecca's apartment. The one Daniel claimed was an investment property, the one I'd never been invited to see. And this? I asked, pointing to another document showing a real estate transaction in progress. Oceanfront property in the Cape Cod area. Purchase price $2.1 million. Your husband is listed as the primary buyer, with a Ms. Rebecca Winters as co-owner. The Rasium, beach house, the one he was telling our children they would love. My fingers trembled slightly as I closed the folder. What happens now? Mr. Harrison straightened in his chair. As of yesterday, we have confirmed that your husband has met the triggering conditions for the trust. This morning, I filed preliminary paperwork with the court. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., all joint accounts will be frozen. His personal accounts will be subject to forensic accounting review, and the trust will immediately release funds to a new account, in your name only, ensuring you and your children are fully provided for. The room seemed to tilt slightly. How much? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mr. Harrison named a figure that made me grip the arms of my chair. That's more than Daniel and I have together. Your grandmother was an excellent investor, Mrs. Reynolds, and she believed in preparing for worst-case scenarios while hoping for the best. I thought about the woman who had raised me after my parents died, who had taught me to always plant extra seeds in the garden because nature takes its share, who had shown me how to mend and preserve and protect. She had been preparing me all along. There's one more thing, Mr. Harrison said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a cream-colored envelope, my name written on it in my grandmother's distinctive cursive. She asked that this be given to you if the trust was ever activated. I took the envelope with trembling hands, but didn't open it. Some messages needed privacy, needed space to be received properly. What will happen to Daniel? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Despite everything, some small part of me still cared what became of the man I had loved for so many years. The legal consequences will depend on his actions going forward, Mr. Harrison explained. The trust doesn't seek vengeance, Mrs. Reynolds. It seeks protection and justice. If he cooperates with the divorce proceedings and fulfills his parental obligations, he will face no criminal charges for the financial improprieties we've documented. Justice, not vengeance. That sounded like my grandmother. And if he doesn't cooperate? Mr. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. Then the trust has provisions for that scenario as well. Your grandmother was thorough. I sat back in my chair, letting everything sink in. Outside the window, Boston continued its busy afternoon. People rushing to meetings, tourists taking photographs, life continuing its forward momentum despite personal earthquakes. I never wanted this, I said quietly. I never wanted my marriage to end this way. Few people do, Mr. Harrison replied kindly. But your grandmother wanted you to have options. She wanted you to face this moment, if it ever came, from a position of strength, not desperation. As I gathered my purse to leave, Mr. Harrison handed me a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. This is my personal cell phone. When your husband discovers the accounts are frozen, and he will, likely tomorrow morning, he may react unpredictably. If you feel unsafe at any point, call me immediately. The trust provides for security. Services if needed. I slipped the card into my wallet, hoping I wouldn't need it, but grateful for its presence. One last question, Mr. Harrison. How did you know? How did you know it was time to call me in, that Daniel was actually planning to leave? The attorney's face remained professional, but his eyes held genuine compassion. We've been monitoring the situation since the first unusual financial movements, but the final confirmation came 3 days ago when Mr. Reynolds made a large cash withdrawal and purchased one-way tickets to Cabo San Lucas. 2 tickets, Mrs. Reynolds, neither in your name nor your children's. I nodded, absorbing this final betrayal like a physical blow. He wasn't just leaving us, he was planning to celebrate it with a tropical getaway. Thank you, I said simply, rising to my feet. Mr. Harrison walked me to the door. Your grandmother used to say that true character is revealed not in how people treat you when things are good, but in how they behave when they think no one is watching. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. Her familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes that I had been holding back through the entire meeting. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then life has dealt you a difficult hand. I'm sorry for that. Truly. But I'm not sorry for preparing you. Sometimes love means planning for storms while praying for sunshine. What you're facing now feels like an ending. I promise you, it is a beginning. You come from a long line of women who bend but don't break. This trust isn't just money, it's freedom. The freedom to choose your path forward without fear. I've watched you grow into a remarkable mother. Your children are lucky to have you. And they will learn, as you learn, that our greatest strength often comes after our most painful lessons. Remember what I taught you about gardens, my sweet girl. Sometimes you must prune ruthlessly for new growth to flourish. With all my love, grandmother. Folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse, next to Mr. Harrison's card and the trust documents. Then I wiped my eyes, reapplied my lipstick, and drove home to prepare for what would come next. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse, next to Mr. Harrison's card and the trust documents. Then I wiped my eyes, reapplied my lipstick, and drove home to prepare for what would come next. The kitchen clock read 3:15 p.m. when I heard the familiar rumble of the school bus stopping at the end of our driveway. I quickly tucked away the financial documents I'd been reviewing and slid my grandmother's letter into the pocket of my cardigan. Taking a deep breath, I straightened the fresh flowers I'd bought on the way home. A small attempt to bring normalcy to a day that was anything but normal. Through the kitchen window, I watched Ethan hop off the bus first, his oversized backpack bouncing against his small frame. His dark hair, so much like Daniel's, was tousled from the playground, and he was chattering excitedly to his sister. Olivia followed more carefully, her honey blonde braids neat despite the school day, clutching a folder that likely contained her latest artwork. My heart ached at the sight of them, still blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. "Mom! Mom!" Ethan burst through the door, dropping his backpack unceremoniously on the floor. "I got picked first for kickball today. First! Even before Tyler, and he's the fastest runner in 3rd grade." I smiled, kneeling to give him a hug. "That's fantastic, buddy. I bet you were amazing." "He kicked it so far, Mom," Olivia added, placing her folder carefully on the counter before giving me her usual after-school hug. Everyone was impressed. Even Ms. Winters from the office came to watch part of recess. My smile faltered slightly at the mention of Rebecca Winters, the school's administrative assistant who had apparently been watching my son during recess while planning to take my husband. Had she been assessing my children all this time? Preparing for her role as their stepmother while sending me cheerful emails about school fundraisers. "That's nice," I managed. "How about some snacks? I made your favorite oatmeal cookies." As the children settled at the kitchen island with milk and cookies, I tried to gauge their mood. Today felt precious suddenly. The last day of their uncomplicated childhood, the final hours before they would have to learn about adult failures and disappointments. "Where's Dad's car?" Olivia asked, always the observant one. "Is he working late again?" I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times since Daniel had driven away, but no script felt adequate. "Actually, your dad and I need to talk to you both about something important," I began, keeping my voice gentle. "He had to go somewhere today, but we can—" "Is it about his secret?" Ethan interrupted, dunking his cookie into his milk. The question caught me completely off guard. "What secret, honey?" Ethan shrugged with the casual indifference only a 7-year-old could manage while discussing something earth-shattering. "About Ms. Winters. I heard Dad talking to her on the phone in the garage. He said they needed to be super secret about their special friendship until he fixed some money stuff." I felt the blood drain from my face. In all my preparations, I hadn't anticipated that my children might already know something was wrong. Olivia shot her brother a warning look. "We weren't supposed to say anything, Ethan. Dad said it was grown-up business." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for a glass of water. "When did Dad tell you this?" "Last week," Olivia said, her voice small. "When he picked us up from school early for dentist appointments. Except we didn't go to the dentist, we went to see a house by the ocean with Ms. Winters." The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. He had already introduced them to Rebecca, had already shown them their future home, all while making me believe today would be their first time hearing about any of it. "The house was huge, Mom," Ethan continued enthusiastically. "It had stairs going right down to the beach and a room just for games. Ms. Winters said we could have sleepovers there on weekends." Did Dad say anything else about this house?" I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. Olivia fidgeted with her cookie, breaking it into tiny pieces without eating any. "He said that sometimes grown-ups decide to make new families, but it doesn't mean they don't love their first family. He said we'd understand when we're older. New families, first family." The casual cruelty of his words to our children struck me like a physical blow. They weren't concepts, they were people. Small, vulnerable people who deserved better than to be categorized like home upgrades. I moved around the island and pulled both children into a tight hug, not trusting myself to speak immediately. Over their heads, I caught sight of our family photo on the refrigerator, the 4 of us at the lake last summer, all genuine smiles. Had Daniel already been involved with Rebecca then? Had he already been planning his exit while we roasted marshmallows and built sandcastles? "I have a question," I said finally, pulling back to look at their faces. "How do you feel about Dad and Ms. Winters in this new house?" Ethan shrugged again. "The house is cool, but Ms. Winters talks to me like I'm a baby, and she told Dad my soccer cleats were too dirty to put in her car." Olivia was more hesitant. "She's nice, I guess, but she kept telling Dad that her apartment building doesn't allow children to use the pool without special permission. And when I asked if I could bring my violin for weekend visits, she said real wood instruments might get damaged by the ocean air." My heart broke for them, already picking up on the subtle messages that they would be tolerated, not celebrated in this new arrangement. "Is Dad moving to the beach house?" Olivia asked, her perceptiveness striking again. "Is that why his suitcases are gone from the closet?" I took another deep breath. "Yes, honey. Dad has decided to live somewhere else, and we need to talk about what that means for our family." "Are we moving too?" Ethan asked, eyes wide. "No," I said firmly. "This is our home. You'll stay at your school with your friends. Nothing changes for you here with me." "But Dad won't live with us anymore?" Olivia's voice wavered, her eyes filling with tears. "No, sweetheart. Dad will have his own place. You'll still see him, but you'll live here with me." "Because of Ms. Winters?" Ethan asked bluntly, the simplified truth of a child. "Partly," I acknowledged. "Sometimes adults make choices that affect everyone. This isn't about you two at all. You've done nothing wrong. Dad still loves you very much." "But he doesn't love you anymore?" Olivia's question pierced straight to the heart of adult complexity. I hesitated, wondering how to explain betrayal and midlife crises to a 9-year-old. "People change sometimes. The important thing is that we're going to be okay. All three of us." Ethan's face crumpled suddenly, the reality catching up with his young mind. "But who's going to coach my soccer team if Dad leaves? He promised we'd practice penalty kicks this weekend." Olivia's tears spilled over. "And what about the science fair? Dad said he'd help me build my solar system model." The practical losses, the daily absences that would accumulate, these were hitting them now, and no beach house or game room could compensate. I guided them to the living room sofa, gathering them close. "I know this is hard and confusing. I can help with your science project, Olivia. And Ethan, I'll learn soccer rules, I promise. We'll figure all of this out together." "But it won't be the same," Olivia whispered. "No," I agreed honestly. "It won't be the same? But different doesn't always mean worse. Sometimes it just means different." We sat together for a long time, talking through their questions, their fears, their anger. I answered as truthfully as I could without burdening them with adult complexities. Yes, Dad made a choice that hurt our family. No, they weren't responsible. Yes, they could still love him. No, they didn't have to like Ms. Winters. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Ethan eventually drifted to the floor with his Lego blocks, processing in his own way. Olivia curled beside me on the sofa, her head on my shoulder. "Mom?" she said quietly. "Are you sad?" I considered my answer carefully. "Yes, I'm sad that our family is changing, but I'm not broken, and neither are you or Ethan." "Grandma Eleanor would say we're bending, not breaking," Olivia murmured, recalling my grandmother's favorite expression. "Exactly," I smiled, stroking her hair. "Grandma would be very proud of how brave you're being." "I miss her," Olivia said. "She always made things better." "She still does," I replied, thinking of the trust fund waiting to protect us. "Some people take care of us even when they're gone." Later, after chicken nuggets for dinner, comfort food seemed appropriate, and extra stories at bedtime, I tucked both children in with additional hugs and reassurances. Ethan fell asleep quickly, emotional exhaustion claiming him. Olivia was more restless. "What if Dad forgets about us?" she whispered as I adjusted her blanket. "That won't happen," I promised. "And if he ever gets too busy, I'll remind him of what's important." She nodded, only partially convinced. "Mom? You won't leave too, right?" "Never," I said firmly, brushing hair from her forehead. "You and Ethan are my heart walking around outside my body. Where you are is where I'll be." After both children were finally asleep, I stood in the hallway between their rooms, listening to their breathing. Tomorrow would bring financial revelations and Daniel's inevitable rage. There would be difficult conversations and legal meetings. But tonight, I had done the hardest thing. I had begun to help my children understand that love sometimes fails, but family remains. I went downstairs to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like an ending. But as I looked at my grandmother's letter, rereading her words by the dim light above the stove, I felt something unexpected stirring within me. Not just determination or resolve, but the first fragile shoots of something that felt surprisingly like freedom. The next morning dawned with deceptive serenity. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I packed school lunches with extra care. Heart-shaped sandwich cutters for Olivia's turkey and cheese, blue food coloring in Ethan's yogurt, handwritten notes tucked alongside napkins. Small gestures of normalcy and love amid the chaos I knew was coming. Mr. Harrison had been precise about the timing. At exactly 9 a.m., the trust's legal mechanisms would activate. Daniel's accounts would freeze, his credit cards would decline. The financial facade he had constructed would collapse like a house of cards in a strong wind. I glanced at the microwave clock. 7:32 a.m. The children needed to be at school by 8:15. With luck, I could drop them off and be back home before the storm hit. "Extra cookies today?" Ethan asked, eyeing his lunchbox as I slipped in 2 chocolate chip cookies instead of the usual one. "Just because," I smiled, zipping up his lunch bag. "Sometimes we all need a little extra sweetness." Olivia was quieter than usual, methodically, brushing her hair into a neat ponytail. "Is Dad going to call today?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm sure he will," I said, though I had no idea what state Daniel would be in by the afternoon. "Why don't you make a list of questions about the science fair project? You can ask him when you talk." She nodded, but I could see she was already preparing herself for disappointment. At 9 years old, my daughter was learning that grown-ups promises were sometimes written in sand, not stone. The school drop-off went smoothly. I hugged them both a little longer than usual, whispering encouragements and reassurances. As I watched them walk into the building, Ethan with his slightly lopsided backpack, Olivia with her perfect posture, I felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. Whatever happened next, I would shield them from as much of the fallout as possible. The dashboard clock read 8:22 when I pulled out of the school parking lot. According to Mr. Harrison, I had 38 minutes before the trust activation. I decided to make a quick stop for coffee, liquid courage for what lay ahead. At 8:47, as I was waiting in line at the local coffee shop, my phone began to buzz. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. It seemed the financial institutions had moved more quickly than expected. I let it go to voicemail. Then a text message appeared. "Call me now. Something's wrong with all our accounts." Another call. Another text. "This isn't funny, Sophia. I'm trying to pay for breakfast and my cards are declining." I placed my coffee order calmly, paying with cash. By the time I reached my car, 6 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic texts had accumulated. The mortgage payment bounced. "What did you do?" Rebecca's realtor just called. "They can't verify the down payment funds." "If you touched our money, I swear to God." I started the car and drove home slowly, deliberately. The trust fund's legal protections included a restraining order if necessary, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Despite everything, I didn't want Ethan and Olivia to see their father led away in handcuffs. At 9:18 a.m., I pulled into our driveway. Daniel's luxury car was already there, parked haphazardly across the front walkway. The front door was unlocked. He still had his key, of course. I found him in the home office, frantically clicking through screens on the computer, his hair disheveled and his designer shirt wrinkled. The remnants of his carefully groomed appearance were unraveling, just like his plans. "What did you do?" he demanded without looking up, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I set my coffee down on the desk, ignoring his question. "I thought you'd be settling into the beach house by now. Isn't the closing today?" He spun the chair to face me, his handsome features contorted with anger. "Don't play dumb, Sophia. Every account is frozen. Every single one. The mortgage payment bounced. My credit cards are declining. Even my personal accounts you don't even know about, are locked." "Accounts I'm not supposed to know." "About, you mean?" I corrected gently. "Like the one funding Rebecca's apartment? Or the offshore account where you've been hiding your year-end bonuses?" His face paled. "How did you—" "I didn't do anything, Daniel. The Reynolds family protection trust did." "The what?" He stood up abruptly, looming over me in a way that might have intimidated me once. "What are you talking about? What trust?" I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, grateful for its warmth. "My grandmother's trust fund, the one that activates when a spouse tries to abandon their financial responsibilities to their children. The one that's been monitoring your financial activities for the past 3 years." He staggered back as if I'd physically struck him, collapsing into the desk chair. "That's impossible. Your grandmother left you that little beach cottage in New Hampshire, nothing else." "That's what you were meant to believe," I replied. "What I believed too until yesterday. Grandmother Eleanor was very thorough and very private about her true financial situation." Daniel's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and calculation. I could almost see his mind racing, looking for angles, for leverage, for escape routes. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "You can't just freeze someone's accounts without legal grounds. I'll have this fixed by lunchtime." "You're welcome to try," I said. "The trust has retained Blackwell, Harrington, and Myers. Perhaps you've heard of them? They specialize in high-profile divorce cases and financial fraud." The name of the prestigious law firm seemed to land like a physical blow. Daniel had once bragged about trying to secure their services for an important client, only to be told their retainer alone was out of his price range. "Divorce?" he sputtered. "I told you, we're keeping things informal." "That's no longer an option," I interrupted. "The trust requires formal legal proceedings to protect the children's interests. Mr. Harrison has already filed the preliminary paperwork." "Mr. Harrison," Daniel repeated, his voice hollow. "Eleanor's ancient attorney with the bow ties? That Fossil is behind this?" "He sends his regards," I said dryly. "He's expecting you at his office at 2 p.m. today. The trust requires your cooperation." Daniel shot to his feet again, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "This is insane. You had no right to go behind my back like this." The irony of his statement was almost laughable. "Behind your back? Like taking the children to view beach houses with your mistress? Like emptying our joint savings account? Like planning one-way tickets to Cabo?" He froze mid-step. "How did you—" "The trust knows everything, Daniel. Every transaction, every hidden account, every lie." His face flushed with anger again, but I could see the first flickers of fear beneath the rage. "So this is your revenge? Freeze all our assets and leave me humiliated in front of Rebecca? In front of my colleagues?" "This isn't revenge," I said, surprised to discover I actually meant it. "This is protection. For me and for the children you were planning to see on occasional weekends when it didn't interfere with your new life." Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Rebecca says the realtor's canceling our contract. Apparently our financing fell through. He looked up at me accusingly. Do you have any idea what you've done? That was our dream home. Your dream, perhaps. The children preferred having a father present in their daily lives. He flinched, then quickly recovered. Don't be dramatic. Kids are resilient. They'd love having beach access and their own game room. They'd love having you at Ethan's soccer games and helping with Olivia's science project, as you promised, I countered. By the way, they already knew about Rebecca. About the beach house, too. You took them there last week instead of to their dentist appointments. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been shame, but it vanished. Quickly. This is temporary, he said, straightening his wrinkled shirt in a futile attempt to regain composure. I'll contest this ridiculous trust. I'll hire my own lawyers. You can't just— I've done nothing, I interrupted. The trust operates independently, created by my grandmother to protect her descendants from exactly this situation. From what situation? He demanded. From moving on when a marriage isn't working? From finding happiness? For the first time, anger flared within me. From betrayal, Daniel. From a spouse who makes vows, creates children, builds a life, and then discards it all for a younger woman and an ocean view. From someone who sees family as disposable and children as weekend obligations. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. His phone buzzed repeatedly, probably Rebecca demanding explanations he couldn't provide. What exactly does this trust want from me? He finally asked, his voice lower. Cooperation, transparency, fair division of assets, appropriate, child support and alimony, shared custody with clearly defined responsibilities. And if I refuse? Then the trust's legal team will pursue fraud charges for the financial improprieties they've documented. They'll freeze your professional assets as well as your personal ones. They'll ensure your partnership at the firm becomes untenable. The why? Color drained from his face. They can't. They can, I said simply. But they don't want to. This isn't about punishment, Daniel. It's about responsibility. He sank back into the chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. I need to think. I need to talk to a lawyer. Mr. Harrison suggested you might, I replied, reaching into my purse and removing a business card. This attorney specializes in representing the interests of the confronting party in trust activations. His retainer has been paid for by the trust as a professional courtesy. Daniel took the card mechanically, staring at it without really seeing it. All this time, he murmured. All these years. Your grandmother's beach cottage and homemade jam and gardening tips. And she was what? Some secret millionaire? She was a woman who learned hard lessons about trust and betrayal, I said quietly. And she made sure her granddaughter would never be financially vulnerable to a husband's midlife crisis. His head snapped up, anger flashing in his eyes again. This isn't a midlife crisis. Rebecca and I are in love. This is real. I didn't argue. There seemed little point. The meeting with Mr. Harrison is at 2 p.m. If you choose not to attend, the trust will move to more aggressive measures. The choice is yours. His phone buzzed yet again. He glanced at it, grimaced, and silenced it. And Rebecca? He asked, his voice smaller now. What am I supposed to tell her? For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine pity for him. The truth, Daniel. That the fantasy life you promised her was built on financial deception and abandoned responsibilities. That actions have consequences. He stood up suddenly, grabbing his car keys from the desk. This isn't over, he said. But the threat sounded hollow even to my ears. You're right, I agreed. It's just beginning. The divorce proceedings, the custody arrangements, the financial disclosures. All very real, very adult consequences for very real, very adult choices. As he stormed out, I heard him mutter, 13 years together, and I never really knew you at all." I watched from the window as he drove away, his tires screeching against the pavement. In a way, he was right. He had never known the woman my grandmother had tried to shape. Someone with quiet strength, with dignity, with the ability to bend, without breaking. He had never really seen me, but he was seeing me now. 6 months later, the cherry trees in our front yard burst into bloom, their delicate pink flowers transforming the landscape overnight. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching as the morning sunlight filtered through the branches. 6 months since Daniel had stormed out of the house. 6 months of lawyer meetings and financial disclosures and carefully structured custody arrangements. 6 months of rebuilding. "Mom, have you seen my blue folder? The one with the science competition research?" Olivia called from upstairs, her voice echoing through the house. "Check the dining room table," I called back. "You were working on it last night after dinner." Ethan thundered down the stairs, soccer cleats in hand. "Mom, can you braid my friendship bracelet tighter? It keeps falling off during practice." I set down my coffee and took the slightly frayed bracelet, a gift from his best friend Tyler, and began reweaving the loose strands. "Big game today?" He nodded vigorously. "Coach says I might play the whole second half if I keep my defense strong." "Coach Crawford seems to really understand your strengths," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral. After the initial shock of Daniel's departure, I had enrolled Ethan in a community soccer league. The young coach, a graduate student with infinite patience, had drawn my son out of his shell week by week, rebuilding the confidence that had crumbled when his father's weekend visits became increasingly sporadic. "Ms. Winters doesn't come to the beach house anymore," Ethan said suddenly, watching me tie off the bracelet. "Dad said she moved to California." I nodded, having heard the news through our lawyer 2 weeks ago. Rebecca Winters had departed for San Francisco with a tech executive, leaving Daniel alone in the much smaller apartment he'd been forced to rent after the beach house fell through. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, sliding the bracelet back onto his wrist. Ethan shrugged with the beautiful resilience of childhood. "She didn't like when I bounced my soccer ball in the house anyway. Dad seems sad, though." Before I could formulate a response, Olivia appeared in the kitchen doorway, blue, folder in hand. "Found it," she announced triumphantly. "Mom, can we stop for smoothies after school? Leah's mom is taking her, and they want us to come too." "Sure," I smiled. "I'll pick you both up at 3:30. The morning routine continued with breakfast, last minute, homework checks, and the usual scramble for backpacks and lunchboxes. Through it all, I marveled at how our rhythm had changed, become more chaotic in some ways, but also more authentic. No more walking on eggshells around Daniel's morning moods. No more pretending to be the perfect family in our perfect house, with our perfect secrets. At 7:45, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Can't make Ethan's game today. Critical client meeting came up. We'll try for the next one." I sighed, slipping the phone back into my pocket without responding. It was the third missed game in a row. I'd tell Ethan later after school with a treat to soften the blow. "Ready, troops?" I called, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. As we piled into the car, Olivia still reading her science notes, Ethan practicing soccer cheers, I thought about how far we'd come since that confrontation in the office. The formal divorce. Proceedings had begun the very next day after Daniel met with Mr. Harrison. Unlike his bold threats, Daniel had ultimately chosen cooperation over conflict when faced with the trust's overwhelming legal resources. The financial settlement had been fair but firm. Daniel retained his partnership at the firm, but half of all marital assets were transferred to me. The children's education was fully secured through the trust. Child support and alimony were set at reasonable levels, enough to maintain our due standard of living but not so punitive that Daniel could claim victimhood. Most importantly, the children's emotional well-being had been prioritized at every step. Joint custody with me as the primary caregiver mandatory family therapy sessions, a detailed parenting plan that Daniel was required to follow, though his adherence had become increasingly spotty as the months passed. After dropping the children at school, I drove to the small storefront in the town center that now housed Bloom Design Studio, my fledgling interior design business. In the months after Daniel's departure, I had finally pursued the career I'd abandoned when we started our family, using a portion of the trust funds to launch the studio. 3 months in, I already had a growing client list and had hired a part-time assistant. "Morning, Sophia," called Maria, my assistant, as I entered the light-filled space. The fabric samples for the Henderson project arrived. They're gorgeous. I hung my coat on the vintage rack by the door and felt the familiar thrill of professional accomplishment. This space, this business, they were entirely mine. Not extensions of Daniel's career or our family image, but the manifestation of my own talents and vision. The Wilsons called to move their consultation to Thursday, Maria continued, handing me a stack of messages. "And Mr. Harrison's office called. They need you to sign some final paperwork on the trust restructuring." I nodded, thinking of my grandmother and how she would have enjoyed seeing this evolution. The trust had been restructured at my request, ensuring that my children would have the same protections I had received, but with an important addition: a small business investment fund earmarked for women entrepreneurs. At noon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unexpected number. "Sophia Reynolds," I answered, balancing the phone while reviewing kitchen tile samples. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Rebecca Winters." I nearly dropped the phone. After 6 months of legal negotiations and family upheaval, the last voice I expected to hear was the woman who had played such a central role in the collapse of my marriage. "Ms. Winters?" I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," she said, her tone lacking the confidence I remembered from school functions. "I'm calling because, well, I think there are some things you should know. Things about Daniel that might affect your children." I set down the tile samples and walked to the private office at the back of the studio. "I'm listening." Over the next 20 minutes, Rebecca outlined a pattern of behavior I had glimpsed but never fully comprehended during my marriage. Daniel's habit of living beyond his means, his constant pursuit of status symbols and validation, his pattern of attaching himself to successful people, including her new tech executive, and then becoming resentful when he couldn't match their achievements or lifestyle. "He told me you were independently wealthy," she said, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "That you were from old money, but incredibly controlling about it. That's why he needed separate arrangements." "And you believed him," I stated rather than asked. "I wanted to," she admitted. "It made everything seem justified somehow. Like we were the victims of your unreasonable behavior rather than a cliché?" I finished for her. She laughed, a brittle sound. "Exactly. Anyway, I thought you should know he's been talking about moving to California. Following me, essentially. He's been asking mutual friends about job opportunities in San Francisco." My stomach tightened. "And the children?" "That's why I'm calling," she said quietly. "He talks about them, about missing them, but his plans don't seem to include regular visits across the country. I thought, they deserve better than that." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing this new information. Daniel considering a cross-country move without discussing it with his children or their mother. Yet another way, he was placing his desires above his responsibilities. I called Mr. Harrison immediately. "We need to modify the custody agreement," I explained after outlining Rebecca's call. "If Daniel moves to California, we need clear provisions for travel expenses, communication schedules, and holiday arrangements. The children can't be left wondering if or when they'll see their father." "I anticipated something like this," Mr. Harrison replied, and I could hear the rustling of papers. "The trust includes provisions for geographic relocation of either parent, We can file the modifications as soon as today. That afternoon, as promised, I took the children for smoothies after school. Watching them chat animatedly about their day, Ethan's successful math test, Olivia's science project advancement to the regional competition, I felt a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for my grandmother's foresight, sadness for the family unit we had lost, but predominantly a deep sense of peace about our path forward. Dad texted me during lunch, Olivia said suddenly, stirring her strawberry smoothie with her straw. He said he might have to take a big trip soon, for work. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. Your dad's career is very important to him, but no matter where he goes, you two are still his children. That doesn't change with distance. Will we still see him if he goes far away? Ethan asked, his voice small. Absolutely, I assured him. We'll make sure of it. We might need to adjust how and when, but you'll always be part of his life. That evening, after homework and dinner and bedtime stories, I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop, reviewing the proposed custody modifications Mr. Harrison had sent over. The legal language was precise, the protections comprehensive. My grandmother's trust was still working, still shielding us from the worst consequences of Daniel's choices. My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. We need to talk about the summer, some potential changes coming. I typed back a simple response. Mr. Harrison is already preparing the necessary modifications to our agreement. The children's needs remain the priority. He didn't reply immediately. When he did, his message was shorter than I expected. Your grandmother was a formidable woman, I smiled, thinking of Eleanor tending her garden in worn gloves and a sun hat, dispensing wisdom along with homegrown vegetables. To most people, she had appeared to be simply a kind-hearted widow with modest means and excellent raspberry jam. Few had glimpsed the strategic mind and fierce protective instincts beneath the floral aprons and gentle smile. Yes, I replied. She was. Later that night, I stood in the doorways of my children's rooms, watching them sleep. Ethan sprawled across, his bed surrounded by sports equipment, one arm flung dramatically over his face. Olivia curled neatly on her side, her science fair notes still clutched in her hand. They were healing, adapting, growing, not despite the challenges, but perhaps because of them. On the wall of my bedroom hung a new addition, a professionally framed photograph of my grandmother in her garden, silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, pruning shears in hand. Beside it, in a smaller frame, was her letter to me, the paper already showing signs of frequent handling. Sometimes you must prune ruthlessly for new growth to flourish. 6 months after Daniel had walked out, new growth was everywhere. In my children's resilience, in my rekindled career, in the quiet confidence that had replaced my former anxiety. The trust fund hadn't just protected us financially, it had given us the space and security to rediscover ourselves. 1 year after, Daniel packed his suitcases and walked out of our lives. I stood in the backyard of our home, now legally mine through the divorce settlement, watching as friends and family gathered to celebrate Olivia's 10th birthday. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene, children laughing as they ran through sprinklers, parents chatting in clusters under the shade of maple trees, tables laden with homemade food and colorful decorations. You've created something beautiful here, said a voice beside me. I turned to find Mr. Harrison, bow tie impeccably centered as always, holding a glass of lemonade and surveying the festivities with approval. Thank you for coming, I said warmly. Olivia was thrilled that you could make it. She still talks about how you showed her your collection of vintage fountain pens when she came to your office. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. A delightful child. Her enthusiasm for mechanical objects reminds me of your grandmother. Eleanor could disassemble and reassemble a clock by the time she was 12. The mention of my grandmother brought a familiar warmth to my chest. She would have loved this. All these children, all this life. She is here, in a way, Mr. Harrison said thoughtfully. Not just through the trust, but through you. Through your children. I nodded, watching as Ethan carefully helped a younger child navigate the slippery grass near the sprinkler. His protective instinct had blossomed over the past year, along with a newfound confidence that no longer depended on his father's intermittent approval. Speaking of the trust, Mr. Harrison continued, lowering his voice slightly, I wanted to inform you that Daniel has signed the final custody modification. All terms accepted, including the college education provisions and the structured visitation schedule if he relocates. So he's definitely moving to California? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Daniel's sporadic visits had become even more infrequent over the past few months, always accompanied by tales of exciting opportunities on the West Coast. The firm has approved his transfer to their San Francisco office, Mr. Harrison confirmed, effective next month. I took a deep breath, processing the information. Despite everything, the preparation, the legal safeguards, the conversations with the children about geographic distance not equaling emotional distance, the finality of it still stung. Not for myself, but for Ethan and Olivia, who deserved a father fully present in their lives. They'll be all right, Mr. Harrison said gently, seeming to read my thoughts. Children are remarkably resilient when surrounded by stability and love. Your grandmother understood that better than most. Mom! Mom! Olivia's voice cut through the party noise as she ran toward me, dark blonde hair streaming behind her, cheeks flushed with excitement. Can we open presents soon, and is Dad coming? He promised he'd try. I checked my watch, 3:45 p.m. Daniel had texted that morning saying he would definitely make an appearance around 2 hours. No update, no apology for the delay. Let's give it a few more minutes for everyone to finish their cake, I suggested, smoothing her hair. And I'm sure Dad is trying his best to get here. She nodded, disappointment flickering across her face before she masked it with a bright smile. Okay, I'm going to check if Tyler wants more lemonade. As she darted off, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. She handles disappointment with remarkable grace for one so young. Too much practice, I replied quietly. At 4:30, with still no sign of Daniel, we gathered everyone for the present opening ceremony. Olivia sat in the decorated chair of honor, surrounded by friends and family, opening each gift with genuine delight and careful thank you notes. My heart swelled seeing her joy despite her father's absence, just as she was unwrapping the final present, a telescope from me to support her growing interest in astronomy. A sleek car pulled into the driveway. Daniel emerged, designer sunglasses in place, carrying an elaborately wrapped box. Sorry I'm late, he announced, striding into the backyard as if his entrance had been perfectly timed. Traffic was a nightmare. Olivia's face lit up. Dad, you made it! She jumped up to hug him, and for a moment, watching him embrace our daughter, I caught a glimpse of the man I had once loved, the one who could light up a room with his charm, who had once promised to build a life with me. Would I miss my favorite girl's birthday? He asked, presenting the large box with a flourish. This is something special for my future scientist. As the party continued, Daniel worked the crowd with his usual charisma, complimenting the food, which he hadn't helped prepare, admiring the decorations, which he hadn't helped set up, and entertaining the children with exaggerated stories of his important work. To an outsider, he might have appeared the perfect father, attentive, playful, generous. But I noticed what others might miss, how he checked his phone every few minutes, how his eyes glazed over when Olivia tried to explain her science competition project, how he deflected Ethan's questions about visiting him in California, with vague promises about amazing adventures once I'm settled. Later, as guests began to depart and the children played with new toys on the lawn, Daniel approached me near the dessert table. You've done well for yourself, he said, gesturing vaguely at the house, the yard, the remnants of the successful party. The business must be taking off. It is, I acknowledged. 3 new corporate clients this month. I just hired a second assistant. He nodded, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or regret, crossing his face. And the kids seem good, healthy, happy. They are. Most days. I met his gaze directly. They miss their father, though. He looked away, focusing on the distant tree line. The San Francisco move is happening, end of next month. It's a huge opportunity, Sophia. The kind that comes once in a career. So, Mr. Harrison informed me. Daniel frowned. Still keeping tabs on me through the trust? Protecting our children's interests, I corrected. Making sure they don't get lost in your huge opportunities. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, still expensively cut, still meticulously styled. I know what you think of me, that I abandoned them, that I chose Rebecca over my own children. Didn't you? The question slipped out before I could temper it. It wasn't that simple. It never is, I conceded. But from their perspective, from a 7- and 9-year-old's perspective, their father chose a new life that didn't include daily bedtime stories or Saturday morning pancakes or regular attendance at birthday parties. He winced. I'm trying, Sophia, the best I can. This move will mean more money, better opportunities for them long term. I thought of all the ways Daniel had always prioritized future promises over present connections. The vacations we would take once this project is finished. The family time we would have when things settle down at work. The father-son camping. Trips that always got rescheduled for next summer, definitely. They need you now, Daniel. Not your money, not your future promises. You. He looked over at the children, his expression unreadable behind the designer sunglasses. I've accepted all the custody modifications. Monthly visits, every other holiday, summer vacations, video calls twice a week. Will you keep those commitments? I asked quietly. Or will they be like Ethan's soccer games, 3 missed for everyone attended? That's not fair, he protested, but without real conviction. Neither is teaching children that they're a scheduling option rather than a priority. Before he could respond, Olivia ran over, her new telescope clutched carefully in her arms. Dad, Mom got me a real telescope. Can you help me set it up? Like you promised when we saw that documentary about space? Daniel hesitated, checking his watch. Actually, Princess, I've got to head out soon. Early meeting tomorrow to prepare for the transfer. But how about this? Once I'm settled in California, you can bring the telescope and we'll stargaze from my balcony. The West Coast has amazing night skies. Olivia's smile dimmed, but she nodded bravely. That sounds cool. Will we really do it? For sure? Absolutely, Daniel promised, giving her another hug. For your next visit, we'll make a whole astronomical expedition of it. After saying goodbye to both children, Ethan more reserved than his sister, offering a quick hug before returning to his friends. Daniel paused at his car. I never meant for things to turn out this way, he said, keys in hand. With the kids, with us, with any of it. I know, I replied. And I did. Daniel hadn't set out to hurt his children or destroy his marriage. He had simply made a series of choices, each one prioritizing his desires over his responsibilities, until the cumulative effect became irreversible. Your grandmother, he said hesitantly. She must have seen something in me from the beginning. Something that made her create that trust. I thought about Eleanor, about her quiet wisdom and keen observation of human nature. I don't think it was about you specifically, Daniel. I think she understood that love sometimes isn't enough, that promises can be broken, that even good people can make choices that hurt those who depend on them. He nodded slowly. She was right. After he drove away, I returned to the backyard where the last few guests were helping clean up. Olivia sat cross-legged on the lawn, reading the instruction manual for her telescope. Ethan was carefully collecting discarded wrapping paper, his natural tidiness asserting itself even amid the party chaos. My sister Rachel appeared at my side, handing me a cup of tea. Daniel made his typical grand entrance and exit, she observed. How are you feeling? I watched my children, thriving despite their father's inconsistency, growing into their own remarkable personalities, learning lessons about resilience earlier than I would have wished, but handling them with extraordinary grace. I'm good, I said, surprised to find it was completely true. We're all good. Later that night, after the party debris had been cleared away and both children were asleep, Olivia with her telescope manual still clutched in her hand, Ethan with the friendship bracelet from his soccer team displayed proudly on his bedside table, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. The same stars my grandmother had taught me to identify during summer evenings in New Hampshire. The same stars Olivia would now learn to name with her new telescope. The same stars that would shine over all of us. Daniel in California, Ethan, and Olivia here with me, Eleanor wherever her spirit resided. My phone chimed with a message from Maria, my business partner. The Henderson contract is signed. They want to move forward with all 3 phases of the redesign. We did it, I smiled, typing back a quick response of celebration. Another milestone for Bloom Design Studio, another step in this unexpected journey. A year ago, I had stood in my bedroom doorway watching my husband pack his bags, feeling as though my world was ending. I had no way of knowing then that it wasn't an ending at all, but a beginning. That, the trust fund my grandmother had so carefully established, wasn't just about financial security. It was about giving me the freedom to discover my own strength. Daniel had indeed chosen his mistress over his children, but the trust fund had other plans. Plans not for revenge or punishment, but for protection and growth. Plans that allowed 3 hearts to heal and flourish, even as one wandered away in search of something that couldn't be found in oceanfront properties or executive positions. I lifted my wine glass to the stars, a silent toast to my grandmother. To her foresight, to her wisdom, to her belief in me long before I believed in myself. Thank you, I whispered to the night sky. And somewhere, in the gentle breeze that stirred the wind chimes Eleanor had given me on my 30th birthday, I could almost hear her response. You were always stronger than you knew. 3 years after Daniel's departure, I stood in the newly expanded offices of Bloom Design Studio, surveying the transformation with quiet pride. What had begun as a small storefront with a part-time assistant had blossomed into a thriving business with 8 employees, a portfolio of high-profile projects, and a recently launched sustainable home goods line that had been featured in 3 national design magazines. The conference call with the Chicago developers is scheduled for 2 p.m., Maria said, handing me a sleek portfolio containing our proposal for their lakefront property renovation. And the photographer will be here at 4 to capture the new showroom for the website. I nodded, making a mental note to call the children's after-school program to arrange late pickup. At 13, Olivia was fiercely independent, but still preferred having an adult present when she arrived home. Ethan, now 10, had soccer practice until 5:30 anyway, his talents on the field having developed into a genuine passion under Coach Crawford's continued mentorship. The San Francisco hotel chain called again? Maria added with a knowing smile. They're very persistent about wanting Bloom for their boutique location redesign. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. San Francisco, of all places, Daniel had been living there for nearly 3 years now, his promised monthly visits having dwindled to quarterly at best, his video calls often rescheduled or cut short due to urgent work situations. The structured custody agreement ensured the children spent 2 weeks with him each summer and alternating major holidays, but even those arrangements frequently underwent last-minute modifications from his end. Should I tell them we're considering it? Maria asked, her pen poised over her scheduling tablet. I hesitated, thinking of the complex emotions that would accompany a professional project in the city where Daniel had rebuilt his life. Then I thought of my grandmother, who had never let personal discomfort interfere with a strategic opportunity. Set up the call, I decided. Their boutique brand aligns perfectly with our aesthetic, and their sustainability goals match our mission. Statement. As Maria left to make the arrangements, I walked through the studio's main workspace where designers bent over drafting tables and material samples were artfully arranged on inspiration boards. The space hummed with creative energy, something I had once channeled solely into making our family home a sanctuary, now expanded into a thriving business that supported multiple families through meaningful employment. My phone chimed with a text message from Olivia. Dad just called. He can't make parents' night at school tomorrow. Again, said to tell you he's sorry. I sighed, texting back, I'll be there. Your science presentation will be amazing. Love you. Her response came quickly. I know you will. You always are. Love you too. The simple exchange captured the evolving reality of our family dynamic. Daniel's absences were no longer surprising or devastating to the children. They had adapted, as children do, to the parent who was consistently present rather than the one who offered intermittent attention. It wasn't the outcome I had wanted for them, but they were thriving nonetheless. Olivia's scientific talents blossoming into regional competition wins, Ethan's athletic and social confidence growing steadily. That evening at home, as Ethan practiced piano, a new interest encouraged by his music teacher, and Olivia worked on her science presentation in her room, I sorted through the mail that had accumulated during my busy week. Among the usual bills and business correspondence was a thick cream envelope bearing the embossed letterhead of Harrison, Meyer & Associates. Inside was a formal letter from Mr. Harrison, now semi-retired but still overseeing the Reynolds family. Protection Trust, along with a smaller sealed envelope with my name handwritten on the front. The letter explained that according to my grandmother's instructions, certain documents were to be delivered to me 3 years after the trust's activation. The enclosed envelope, Mr. Harrison explained, had been entrusted to the firm by Eleanor, with specific timing requirements for its delivery. With curious fingers, I opened the sealed envelope to find another letter in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, 3 years have passed since the trust was activated. 3 years of changes, challenges, and growth that I can only imagine from the distant vantage point of writing this letter. By now, you will have discovered something I learned through my own life's unexpected turns. True strength isn't found in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. In bending without breaking, in growing beautiful new branches after harsh pruning. I created the trust to protect you financially, yes, but more importantly, to give you time and space to discover your own capabilities you might never have fully realized within the constraints of a marriage that diminished rather than elevated you. The enclosed document transfers full control of the trust to you. You may maintain it as is, modify its terms, or even dissolve it entirely. The choice is yours, as all choices should be. I trust your judgment implicitly. Whatever path you choose, remember that the greatest inheritance I could leave you was never money or property, but the unshakable knowledge of your own resilience. With immeasurable love and pride, Grandmother Eleanor P.S. There is one additional surprise waiting for you. Mr. Harrison has the details. Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter twice more, hearing my grandmother's voice in every carefully chosen word. Then I examined the legal document transferring trust control to me, the culmination of Eleanor's long-term plan not just to protect me but to empower me. The following day, after Olivia's brilliantly successful science presentation, which earned her a spot in the state competition, and Ethan's enthusiastic recounting of his soccer team's new strategy, I visited Mr. Harrison's office to discuss the trust transfer. "Your grandmother would be immensely proud," he said, adjusting his signature bow tie as we sat in his wood-paneled office. "Not just of how you've handled the financial aspects, but of the example you've set for your children." "I've tried to show them that endings can become beginnings," I said, thinking of the many conversations we'd had about resilience and adaptation over the past 3 years. That sometimes what feels like loss clears space for something new to grow. Precisely what Eleanor hoped you would discover. He smiled, pulling a small brass key from his desk drawer. "And now, for the surprise she mentioned. This belongs to you." I accepted the key with a questioning look. "It opens a safety deposit box at First Meridian Bank," he explained. "Eleanor established it before her passing with instructions that you were to access it only after assuming control of the trust." That afternoon, I stood in the private viewing room of First Meridian Bank, the contents of the safety deposit box arranged before me on the polished table. There was another letter, of course. My grandmother had always believed in the power of written words. But alongside it were items I hadn't expected. A small velvet jewelry box containing Eleanor's engagement ring from her second, happy marriage. A collection of photographs I had never seen before, showing a young Eleanor in elegant business attire outside various properties. And most surprisingly, stock certificates and property deeds dating back to the 1950s and 60s. The letter explained everything. "Sophia, the conventional story of my life, the one you and everyone else knows, is incomplete. Before I was simply Grandma Eleanor with her garden and her jam recipes, I was Eleanor Reynolds, real estate investor. After my first husband left me for his secretary, yes, even in the 1950s that cliché existed, I found myself with nothing but determination and the business education my forward-thinking father had insisted I receive. While other divorced women of my era often struggled in the margins, I began quietly purchasing small properties, renovating them, and selling at profit. By the time I met your grandfather Richard, I had a portfolio that surprised even him, though, being the wonderful man he was, he found my financial independence admirable rather than threatening. Together, we expanded these investments, always operating under the principle that financial security creates freedom of choice. The Reynolds Protection Trust was born from my experiences, not just from being abandoned by my first husband, but from watching countless women throughout my lifetime trapped in untenable situations because they lacked economic independence. The properties and investments documented here are the foundation upon which the trust was built. I've arranged for Mr. Harrison to provide you with the complete financial history should you wish to understand it fully. My darling granddaughter, the true legacy I leave you is not financial acumen, but the understanding that women must be the architects of their own security and fulfillment. That beauty can be found in creating something meaningful from the rubble of disappointment. Your design studio, yes, I always knew your talent would find expression someday, is the perfect continuation of this legacy, creating spaces where others can thrive, just as you have learned to do for yourself and your children. With boundless love, Eleanor. I sat in the viewing room for a long time, absorbing this revelation about the grandmother I thought I had known completely. Eleanor Reynolds, not just a warm presence with gardening wisdom and homemade preserves, but a pioneering businesswoman who had quietly built a financial empire while society underestimated her. The parallels to my own journey were undeniable. Both of us had found unexpected strength and purpose after personal betrayal. Both had transformed loss into opportunity. Both had learned to create beauty and meaning from circumstances others might view as devastating. That evening, I shared selected photographs of the young professional Eleanor with Ethan and Olivia, explaining parts of their great-grandmother's story they had never known. Olivia, especially, was captivated by this new dimension of her namesake, her full name, Olivia Eleanor Reynolds, now carrying even deeper significance. So, great-grandma Eleanor was basically a secret real estate mogul? Ethan asked, examining a photo of Eleanor standing proudly in front of a small apartment building. Something like that, I smiled. She didn't believe in limiting herself to what others expected of her. Like you with your design business, Olivia observed, her perceptiveness, so like Eleanor's, shining through. I suppose so, I acknowledged. Though I had an advantage she didn't have. What's that? Ethan asked. I had her example, and her protection. Later that night, after the children were asleep, I sat at my desk reviewing the design proposal for the San Francisco hotel project. Taking on this commission would mean occasional trips to the city where Daniel now lived, a city I had consciously avoided for 3 years. It would mean potentially encountering him in professional settings, as his architectural firm sometimes consulted on luxury hospitality projects. The old Sophia, the one who had stood in the bedroom doorway watching Daniel pack his bags, might have declined the project to avoid potential discomfort. But the woman I had become, shaped by Eleanor's legacy and my own hard-won growth, recognized the opportunity for what it was. A chance to expand my business into new territory, to create beautiful spaces that would outlast personal histories, to demonstrate to my children that past wounds need not dictate future choices. I signed the preliminary agreement and emailed it to Maria with instructions to proceed. The following weekend, as has become our tradition, the children and I visited Eleanor's gravesite, bringing fresh flowers and sharing updates about our lives, Olivia's scientific achievements, Ethan's growing confidence, my expanding business. The simple granite headstone bore her name and the dates of her birth and death, but nothing of the extraordinary legacy she had created. I think great-grandma would be pretty impressed with all of us, Ethan said, arranging his hand-picked wildflowers in the small stone vase. She'd definitely love your design studio, Mom, Olivia added, especially how you use salvaged materials in new ways. She understood the value of transformation, I agreed, thinking of how Eleanor had transformed her own life's disappointments into wisdom and prosperity, of creating something new from what remains after loss. As we walked back to the car, Olivia slipped her hand into mine, a gesture becoming rarer as she grew into her teenage independence. Mom, I've been thinking about something. What's that, sweetheart? When Dad left, it seemed like the worst thing ever. But now, she hesitated, searching for words. Now I think maybe it showed us who we really are, how strong we can be. From the mouth of babes, as Eleanor would have said. I think you're right, I replied, squeezing her hand gently. Sometimes the hardest chapters of our story reveal our true character. Like great-grandma Eleanor after her first husband left, Ethan chimed in, surprising me with his insight. Exactly like that, I smiled, looking at these remarkable children who had weathered their father's departure not with bitterness, but with growing wisdom. That night, I added a new frame to the wall in my bedroom, one containing the photograph of young Eleanor in her business attire, standing confidently before her first investment property. Beside it hung her letter about resilience, and next to that, a recent photograph of me at the ribbon cutting for Bloom Design Studios' expanded offices. 3 generations of women who had learned that sometimes what seems like an ending is merely the first line of a new chapter, that trust funds and financial protections are valuable, but the most precious inheritance is the strength that emerges when life doesn't go according to plan. Daniel had indeed chosen his mistress over his children, but Eleanor's trust fund had other plans, and those plans had revealed something far more valuable than any financial security. The unshakable knowledge that we were, and always had been, stronger than we knew. 5 years after Daniel packed his bags and left our home, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Meridian Bay Hotel in San Francisco, watching as photographers captured images of the space I had spent the past 8 months designing. The renovation had been Bloom Design Studio's largest project to date, a complete reimagining of a historic property into a sustainable luxury hotel that honored its architectural heritage while embracing modern sensibilities. Mrs. Reynolds? A young assistant approached with a tablet. The hotel director would like to know if you're available for a brief interview with the architectural journal that's here covering the opening. I nodded, smoothing the lapel of my tailored blazer, a far cry from the casual clothes I had worn in my former life as Daniel's wife. Of course. And please, it's Ms. Reynolds. As I followed the assistant through the bustling lobby, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished brass elevator doors, a confident woman of 42, with purposeful stride and clear eyes. The worried shadows that had once haunted my expression had long since disappeared, replaced by the serene confidence that comes from weathering storms and discovering one's true capabilities. The transformation wasn't just internal. Bloom Design Studio had evolved from a modest local business into a recognized name in sustainable luxury design, with projects across 3 states and a recently opened second office in Chicago. The small inheritance from my grandmother's initial trust disbursement had grown into a thriving enterprise that supported 28 employees and their families. Sophia. A familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned to find Daniel standing near the check-in desk, looking both familiar and foreign at once. 5 years had added touches of gray to his temples and new lines around his eyes, but his clothing still projected the carefully curated image of success. Designer suit, expensive watch, immaculate grooming. Daniel, I replied, surprised at how steady my voice remained. I didn't expect to see you here. My firm consulted on the structural renovations, he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the soaring ceiling with its restored Art Deco details. I saw the design credits this morning. Bloom Design Studio. I should have made the connection. An awkward silence stretched between us. 2 people who had once shared everything from a bed to a mortgage to children, now virtual strangers meeting in a professional context. Your work is remarkable, he said finally, glancing around at the harmonious blend of historic elements and contemporary touches that define the space. The whole city is talking about this renovation. Thank you, I replied simply, accepting the compliment without elaboration. There had been a time when I would have diminished my achievements, deflected praise, made myself smaller in Daniel's presence. That time had long passed. Mrs. Reynolds? The assistant reappeared. They're ready for you in the mezzanine lounge. Daniel raised an eyebrow at the formal address. I resumed using Reynolds professionally, I explained. It connects the business to grandmother Eleanor's legacy. He nodded slowly. The trust fund grandmother, the one who saw me coming from miles away. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a rueful acknowledgement of truth. Before I could respond, my phone chimed with a text from Olivia, now 15, and buzzing with the energy of adolescence. Science competition results posted. First place. Can we celebrate when you're back from SF? Love you. I couldn't help the proud smile that spread across my face as I quickly texted back congratulations and promised a celebration dinner upon my return. The kids? Daniel asked, his expression softening. Olivia just won first place in the state science competition. Her research on urban garden sustainability impressed the university judges. She always was brilliant, Daniel said, a mixture of pride and regret coloring his voice. And Ethan? How's he doing? Team captain of his soccer team now, and developing quite a talent for photography. He documents all of Olivia's science experiments. Daniel nodded, absorbing these updates about the children he now saw only 3 or 4 times a year despite the carefully structured custody agreement. His move to San Francisco had indeed created the geographical barriers I had feared, and his promises of regular visits had gradually given way to the reality of his prioritization of career advancement and his new life. "They're thriving," he said softly. "You've done an amazing job with them." "They've done an amazing job with themselves," I corrected gently. "They're resilient, Daniel. They've learned to build beautiful lives even when things don't go as expected." The significance of my words wasn't lost on him. His gaze dropped to the polished marble floor for a moment before meeting mine again. "I've been meaning to call you." "Actually," he said, "about the summer plans. I know it's my turn to have them for 3 weeks, but there's a situation with work." "A project in Singapore," I finished for him. "Olivia mentioned it last week during your video call. She said, you seemed really excited about the opportunity." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "It's a 6-month assignment. Career-defining. I was hoping we could adjust the schedule, maybe do shorter visits spread out differently." 5 years ago, this conversation would have devastated me. Not for myself, but for my children facing yet another disappointment from their father. Now, I simply acknowledged it as the latest in a pattern that had become familiar to all of us. "We'll make it work," I said, not unkindly. "But Daniel, they're getting older. Olivia will be applying to colleges in 2 years. Ethan's developing his own interests and commitments. The window for building those relationships isn't infinite." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I know, it's complicated." "It always is," I acknowledged. "But some things are worth the complication." Before he could respond, the assistant cleared her throat discreetly, reminding me of the waiting journalists. "I should go," I said, glancing at my watch. "Feel free to coordinate schedule changes through Mr. Harrison's office as usual." As I turned to leave, Daniel called after me. "Sophia? For what it's worth, I was wrong. About a lot of things." I paused, looking back at the man who had once been the center of my world. "We all make choices, Daniel. The important thing is learning from them." The interview went smoothly, focusing on the hotel's innovative blend of historical preservation and sustainable design elements. I spoke confidently about Bloom's philosophy of creating spaces that honored the past while embracing the future, a perspective that had emerged from my personal journey as much as my professional training. That evening, back in my hotel suite, I FaceTimed with the children to celebrate Olivia's big win. Their faces filled the screen. Olivia proudly displaying her trophy, Ethan photobombing with silly faces before showing me his latest soccer medal. I told all my friends that my mom designed the famous hotel that's in the architecture magazines, Ethan announced proudly. "My art teacher brought in the article and everything. And I put your name in my science competition acknowledgments," Olivia added, "for teaching me about sustainable materials when I was little." Their words warmed me more than any professional accolade could. Despite everything, despite Daniel's choices, despite the upheaval of our family structure, they had emerged as confident, kind, accomplished young people. Not damaged or bitter, but strengthened by adversity in ways I could never have predicted during those first painful days after Daniel's departure. After saying goodnight to the children, I walked out onto the hotel suite's balcony, gazing at the San Francisco skyline glittering against the night sky. Somewhere in that vast city, Daniel was living his chosen life, a life that increasingly existed separate from his children, a life that prioritized career advancement over family connections. Felt no anger toward him anymore, no resentment for the choices he had made. Those emotions had gradually transformed into something more like quiet understanding. Daniel had always been driven by external validation, by the pursuit of status and achievement. That fundamental aspect of his character hadn't changed when he left us for Rebecca. It had simply found new expression in his career ambitions after she too had moved on. My phone chimed with an email notification from Mr. Harrison, confirming that the final scholarship recipients had been selected for the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation for Women in Business and Design. 5 young women would receive full college funding, and mentorship opportunities, carrying forward my grandmother's legacy of female empowerment and financial independence. I smiled, thinking of how that legacy had evolved over 3 generations. From Eleanor's quiet real estate empire built in the 1950s after her first husband's betrayal, to my own design studio flourishing after Daniel's departure, to these young women who would build their own paths with more support than either Eleanor or I had initially received. The trust fund that Eleanor had established hadn't just protected us financially. It had created space for transformation, for the discovery that what feels like an ending can actually be a powerful beginning, that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as devastating losses. Back in my suite, I opened my laptop to review images from Bloom's newest project, a community center in our hometown that would provide affordable childcare, job training, and resources for single parents. The center would open next month, with a small garden dedicated to Eleanor's memory. As I scrolled through the photographs, I paused on one showing the garden's central feature, a hand-carved bench inscribed with Eleanor's favorite saying, "Sometimes you must prune ruthlessly for new growth to flourish." When I had first heard those words as a child, helping my grandmother in her garden, I had thought them merely practical horticultural advice. Now I understood their deeper wisdom, the painful pruning of divorce, of betrayal, of abandoned promises, had cleared space for unexpected blossoming, in my children's resilience, in my professional fulfillment, in our collective ability to build something beautiful from what remained. Daniel had indeed chosen his mistress over our children. Later, he had chosen career advancement over consistent presence in their lives. Each choice had cut like pruning shears, removing what had once seemed essential. But the trust fund had other plans, and those plans had revealed that what remains after loss is not emptiness, but possibility, not absence, but opportunity, not an ending, but a new and unexpected beginning. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror and was struck by how much I resembled Eleanor in certain angles. The same determined set of the jaw, the same clear gaze. I had never noticed this resemblance during my marriage to Daniel, but now it seemed unmistakable. I thought about the generations of strength flowing through our family line, from Eleanor to me to Olivia and even Ethan. The strength not to avoid life's hardships but to transform them into wisdom, to bend without breaking, to create beauty from what remains after loss. Tomorrow, I would return home to celebrate Olivia's scientific achievement and Ethan's latest soccer victory. I would continue building Bloom Design Studio into a company that reflected values of sustainability and authentic beauty. I would honor my grandmother's legacy through both the Trust's charitable initiatives and my own living example of resilience. The Trust Fund had provided financial security, yes, but the true inheritance, the one that could never be spent or diminished, was the discovery that sometimes what seems like betrayal is actually liberation in disguise, that endings can become beginnings, that we are always stronger than we know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.